Good morning, everybody, and thank you again for coming out on Saturday morning. We know everyone's busy, and we're excited to see so many people interested in the Hong Kong Art Gallery Association's Art Week and the many events we have planned for the rest of the week. And we hope that you'll encourage your friends to attend the events. It's very important for us to emphasize that all of the events are free admission. Everyone's welcome. The more the merrier. We hope that you'll join us on our whole week-long series of events. I wanted to emphasize the gallery walk, which is taking place on the 3rd of November. We have a ticket sale desk over here. It's actually the only event that you have to pay for, but you should all be happy to pay for it because all of the money will be going to charity. And it's the first year that we've really made a big effort to do a charity event, and we want to raise a lot of money for the charities that we're supporting, not only artist charities, but also poverty relief charities here in Hong Kong. So please try to help us sell as many tickets as possible. You can buy tickets today. You can buy tickets online at Ticket Flap. You can also buy tickets at the galleries. So lots of opportunities to support our charity walk November 3rd. Please come and support the galleries. Before we get started, I just wanted to say one of our speakers today is ill, so Tisa Ho has not been able to make it. All of our other distinguished speakers are here. Continuing along from what Charles Guarino said to us in the last talk, he talked about art being extended across all medium and across the city. And although we are a gallery association of over 50 members, my name is Meg Maggio. I'm the director of Peking Fine Arts, and I'm also the board member of the Hong Kong Art Gallery Association, responsible for public relations and marketing. So please give us your feedback, what you like about this week of art events and what you don't like about this week of art events, so we can improve next year. This is our 5th Art Week. 5th year of doing week-long art programs, and we're trying to improve and add new programs every year. This is our first art symposium. This is our first charity walk. So every year we want to add new programs, and we want to hear what you, our members, our 50-plus gallery members, and the general public in Hong Kong want us to do, and how we can service you better as art galleries and members of the Hong Kong art community. So today we're really extending the concept of art community beyond the galleries into the many festivals that take place in Hong Kong, and also into nonprofit art spaces around the world that are available for Hong Kong artists. We are very lucky today to have Rachel with us, who flew in especially for this event from Berlin. She runs an art space called Momentum in Berlin. Some Asian artists have already participated in the program, but we want other people to be aware that it's a resource available to Hong Kong artists, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about that. Rachel Rits-Volloch, she's the founding director of the Momentum Art Space in Berlin. We're also privileged to have with us today Hing Chao, who has recently set up a new arts program in Hong Kong. He's the founding chairman of the Intangible. He's very involved not only with having set up the Hong Kong Cultural Festival, but he's also very involved in Hong Kong with cultural heritage and cultural heritage protection, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that this morning. The moderator of today's panel is Cherry Chan. She is the director of The Mills, a new not-profit art space in Hong Kong, which I hope all of you have an opportunity to visit in the coming days and months. We also have Julien-Loïc Garin, who is the CEO of the Le French May Art Festival, which we're all very familiar with, has a long history of bringing us wonderful cultural events during the month of May in Hong Kong. And in addition, he started a new event called the Lumières Hong Kong, and he's going to introduce that new event to you today. So without further ado, I'd like our speakers to tell you a little bit about their projects that are going to help us here in Hong Kong.
Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be part of the panel today. So I guess without further ado, maybe we can have a little blurb from each of the speakers. Tell us what you do and why do you do it. Hing?
Thanks, Jerry. Good morning, everyone. Hong Kong Culture Festival started last year. The idea of starting Hong Kong Culture Festival is to create a comprehensive platform for local arts and culture. We have a very strong focus on intangible cultural heritage. Now, the name intangible cultural heritage may be increasingly familiar, but some of you may not be familiar what it actually means. It's basically anything that is part of our local traditions and heritage. Either it could be handicraft, it could be a way of knowing the world, it could be festivals, etc. So it's an all-encompassing label for traditional culture, and many of which are not immediately visible to the eyes. For example, in intangible culture, it's different from built monuments, architects, paintings, etc. But how do we express it? Because the name itself, ICH, is so forbidding, we try to reach out to the public using a different range of activities that can be as engaging as possible. So our program basically can be divided into 4 main headings. One is we have performing arts. So for example, Hong Kong has a very distinguished tradition in some of the more obscure Chinese performing arts tradition, such as, for example, the unicorn dance, which is now inscribed as an item of intangible cultural heritage in China. We have Taoist music. Many of you would be familiar with Chinese music, but not Taoist music per se. But Hong Kong Taoist music has a history of over 100 years, which is continuous with the tradition originating in Guangzhou. So we have a range of performing arts program. We also work with prominent performing arts groups, such as Hong Kong Dance Company, with the view of curating original productions several years down the road. Besides performing arts, we also work with Hong Kong galleries and the Hong Kong arts community for a series of exhibitions. So for example, this year we have 4 visual arts and new media arts exhibitions in several venues across the territory, both in Kowloon and Hong Kong, and we have bigger scale public events, and then we have workshops, seminars, etc. So that's basically Hong Kong Culture Festival in a nutshell.
Wonderful. I think it's a great celebration of a lot of hidden gems of Hong Kong culturally. So if I may turn to Rachel. So Rachel, what do you do? Tell us, please.
Thank you, Cherry. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Momentum. It's a global platform for time-based art, which I founded in 2010 in Sydney, Australia, as a parallel event to the 17th Biennale of Sydney. The artistic director, David Elliott, you might have heard his talk and panel yesterday. And then after a 4-day event involving a symposium with 32 international speakers, as many artists in an exhibition program, performance program, micro-residencies, art in public space, after 4 brilliant days of this, we moved back to Berlin, and then I thought, now what? So I'm actually the only odd one out on this panel. I don't run a festival anymore. I run an art space, a permanent platform with an exhibition program, education, a collection, a performance archive and program, and residencies. Open also, very much open to Hong Kong artists and curators. We are a bridge between international art communities. We show art across institutional and national borders. We do thematic exhibitions, also solo shows. It's quite a broad remit, but the main focus of Momentum is around the technologies which mediate our access to the world. As visual languages evolve, the technologies which drive them evolve as well. And I see it as the role of artists to be on the cutting edge of confronting these new technologies, ways of seeing and ways of interacting with the world. And that's what Momentum is there to do. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. So, Julien, you just told me Le French May is going to celebrate its 25th anniversary in Hong Kong next year. So it's been around a while. So what are you up to these days?
Thank you, Cherry. So actually, Le French May is a local charity based in Hong Kong, and indeed we are about to launch the 25th edition. So as its name says, it's happening in May, originally only in May, and now it runs over May and June. And the idea is actually to promote exchanges between local and French culture, to bring here French arts, and to try to present exhibition, performances, cinema, design and fashion with a program of over 100 events. The idea being to really reach out every part of the community and every part of the city. So we have the chance to organize events in museums, but also working a lot with the galleries in Hong Kong, with the local art communities, the performing groups. And the idea is really every year to present different kind of arts, trying also to feel the trend and working in this direction. For example, we organized 2 years ago an exhibition about Invader, the street artist, because we saw that street art was slowly evolving in Hong Kong, and we wanted to bring our own part of what the street art field in France, which is very developed. So that's a bit what we are trying to do. And as Meg just introduced, we are launching next year what we hope to be an annual event, which is Lumières Hong Kong. The idea is a bit in the direction of what Hing is doing to promote local culture as well and all the local treasures, more a bit on the built architecture actually, but to show that Hong Kong is a very modern city, but also has a lot to say about its past, its culture, and its vibrant art scene. So the idea is to use light projection and light installation during 3 days to enhance a bit our love of the city and what makes it very unique.
Thank you, Julien. I've always teased Julien, I'm like, Le French May, it's not Le French May, it's Le French Spring. And it seems like it might become Le French Year because you told me the Macau exhibition is still ongoing. So it's really become one of the sort of big cultural events in the city. So if I may go back to Hing, who comes? Who do you want in the audience with your cultural festival?
Well, I think for some of our routine programs, for example, since we started the Culture Festival last year, one of the fixtures we've had over this two-year period is Cantonese opera. And typically, if you go to watch a Cantonese opera, you're laughing already. The average age of the
uncles, yes.
audience would be around 60 years old upwards. And you'll seldom see anyone below 50. People also joke that, is there a danger that people will stop going to watch Cantonese opera? People say no. Once you hit 60, you'll develop a passion and interest to go to Cantonese opera. Now, we hope to change that. Right? We want to change that earlier. We want to change the perception that somehow local heritage, local arts and culture, it's for all people. That's something of the past. It's disconnected with the heartbeat of Hong Kong. So I think young people, including young artists, students, people across different creative fields, perhaps young at heart, not necessarily in age, are among our most important stakeholders and people who want to engage the most. So, for example, this year, working with one of the youngest Cantonese opera groups, we commissioned a new production and we gave away a lot of free tickets. So I think the average age of the audience was closer probably to 15 than 16.
Wow.
So I think that also goes across the different fields. When we talk about aim painting, we're also exploring different boundaries of aim painting. That's not necessarily limited to paper and not limited to ink. And same applies to Kung Fu. So we're really trying to give a new spin, a new perception, and helping traditional heritage find new directions going into the 21st century and beyond.
So I understand you want to attract a younger group. Mm-hmm. Do you want the KOLs in arts and culture, or you want the uninitiated? Who do you desire more in your audience?
I think we engage experts and people who are already involved. For example, one of the exhibitions we did, one of the anchor events for this year, it's 300 years of Hakka Kung Fu. So a lot of the people who came to this exhibition will be practitioners who've been involved in this field for decades. But we also want to open a new lens to look at traditional culture, and we're also hoping to attract people who are not already stakeholders, who have no prior exposure to this type of culture, to come and learn. So really, we don't necessarily impose a limit in that sense.
Great. So, Julien, who do you want in the audience? just French, the French in Hong Kong? There are lots of them now, I know. Or you want us locals? You want the people who buy the French brands? Or you just want students? Who are you looking for?
No, I think it's a question we always have. So definitely not the French, because
not welcome.
I think that's not our target. I mean, because I think promoting French arts and culture to the French doesn't really make sense to involve such efforts. But the idea is more to actually try to bring what we think is very interesting in the arts in France, from exhibitions to performances, as I said, to really reach out the widest audience possible. So that's why when we build a program, we try to be very broad in a way that we will bring very beautiful classical music as well as hip-hop, because the idea is really to try to bring different formats for different audiences. And as Hing highlighted, the idea is also to, when you bring arts and culture, I believe you have to work towards education a lot. So it's not just nice to put beautiful Monet paintings on the walls and just say, okay, look, that's beautiful, but trying to explain, particularly to an audience in Hong Kong, which is not too much familiar about Western art sometimes, and that no impressionism because it's expensive and some of the names are very famous, but to try to understand why it was a revolution, what it brought to the arts, and how the contemporary art that they can see a lot now in Hong Kong with Art Basel, for example, comes from that and what we have to appreciate. So I think, to answer your question, my targeted audience is everybody, but we try to find the ways or the keys to give an appeal to them, so at least they come to the museum or to attend the performances because it relates to them somehow.
So Rachel, who comes to Momentum?
As many people as possible. Momentum is located in an art center in Berlin, full of lots of nonprofit spaces, many theater companies, galleries, artist studios. We're in a community of galleries in Kreuzberg, also a very local Turkish neighborhood, and people come. It's a known art center, so I have a kind of a captive audience, luckily. But actually, Berlin is a very particular art scene. You might know Berlin as the art capital of Europe. It's a well-deserved title. To give you an example, there are over 500 commercial galleries in Berlin. There are over 150 nonprofit art spaces like mine, small independent spaces. This isn't to mention all the huge number of museums, the countless festivals. On any given night in Berlin, and I'm not exaggerating, there are dozens of openings. You look at the online arts listings, and these are just the kind of the curated selections, and you will literally get dozens of choices scattered all over the city. So I'm always amazed when people come to my shows. There's so much else on. But somehow that overabundance, that oversaturation doesn't turn people off. There's a critical mass of interest that's still building and building. All of these art spaces compete for the same funding. So when I apply for grants to do my shows, I'm actually competing with the Neue Nationalgalerie, the main museums in the city. So what actually gets put on, what gets seen, what the shows that get funded from within the city and internationally, it's a battle, but people come. There's audience for it, amazingly.
In the oversaturated environment of Berlin, what do you do to attract your audience?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Remarkably, it's not oversaturation. The audience is still thirsty. They're curious. And maybe it's more of a tradition. What do you do on a Thursday night or a Friday night? Well, you go to some openings, and then you go out for dinner with your friends, and then you go to a party. Quite often, openings last very late. Usually, I advertise my openings as between 7 and 9 in the evening. No one wants to leave, and I don't kick them out. And we hang out in the gallery until midnight, and finally I say, come on, people, I'm tired, it's time to go. There's, as here, I'm sure, there's communities that tend to go to the same openings. What builds audiences and communities also in Berlin is cooperation. People really help each other out. and they'll communicate each other's programs, lend equipment, go to each other's events, and there's a supportive environment. I started Momentum completely independently with no funding. I have no institutional funding. I rented a space, I opened the door, I went and bought monitors and DVD players. That was about the sum total of it. And there is this sense of grassroots possibility. People in Berlin you have an idea, and it's still feasible to make it happen. Yes, prices are rising, things are getting more expensive, but students out of art school can still afford to make a pop-up gallery or put on a show, realize a project, and there'll be enough people to help them.
That's wonderful to hear. It seems like the Berliners have a long-standing, steady relationship with the arts and with Momentum. So I need to turn back to the cultural festival organizers. So, Hing, is the festival just a cultural fling with the city? What goes on after a few days or after, a couple of weeks of events?
Actually, my organization, Intangible Cultural Heritage, Earthfield Society, we are engaged with local community, and we work in collaboration with the Hong Kong government to do a lot of research. So a lot of what you see during 2 months of festival between October to September and October across these 2 months are the result of research the previous year. So, for example, the exhibition we are currently staging, which reopened at the University of Hong Kong, the 300 Years of Hakka exhibition, we spent a whole year researching and documenting and engaging artists with reinterpretation of the raw data, etc. So we are not just the platform, we're also the people who get into the field, get our hands dirty to do and work with artists and work with community to preserve and create, foster a better environment for creativity and to give artistic outlets for traditional cultural stakeholders.
Great. Julien, is it Le French Fling or is it more?
So people usually tease me, asking me what I'm doing the rest of the year when it's not May and June. And the next thing is asking why doing a festival and not a series of events all along the year. I think it's building the momentum in a way that you gather the attention, you gather the funding, as you said, it's quite critical, and also you build a platform so for people know that there is something to expect at this time of the year, and then you can plan somehow. Everybody's very, very busy, as we know in Hong Kong, there is a lot of things happening, so that's why we try to anchor the event, annually during this period to build as much as we can. But of course, doesn't mean that the rest of the year we don't build on cooperation with the local galleries and the local performers as well to go towards this momentum and trying to then have this platform for that. I think that's a good example of the Art Week is trying to have this moment of celebration. So I hope what we have been doing in the past 25 years will go on for at least 25 more years, but we never know.
Great. So I think, these cultural festivals, we see it as an audience. We might only see it as a few days of fun and celebration, but it's actually a lot of hard work for the organizers all year round. So if I may turn to maybe the international part of the symposium today. Why Hong Kong? Do you have Le French May anywhere else?
That's a good question. I wasn't there 25 years ago when it was created, but definitively I think it's because there was and there is still a bit a bridge between the demand and the offer, if I can speak this way. I think Hong Kong audience particularly is striving to have more and more arts program. So at the time when they started to have a little week of French event, then it seemed that it worked and there is more and more wish to have more programs, and then it expanded over the years, and that's why the festival is so big in Hong Kong. But of course, nothing exists the same way in the rest of the world. We do have French cultural festivals everywhere, but I believe Hong Kong is very special in this way that you have space to organize things. There is a huge demand for more cultural events, so we try to take this space more and more and trying to do more programs.
Great. Rachel, what's Hong Kong's appeal for you?
It's beautiful. Full of talented artists, great galleries, and it's actually part of the mission of Momentum. As I said earlier, to act as a bridge between international arts communities. So we've done events and exhibitions and programs in many countries, in China, in Eastern Europe. I'm particularly attracted to Hong Kong in China, just out of a personal interest. And I'd love to develop more projects here. Yeah.
Great. We'd love to see you here more. So, Hing, of course, you have to be based in Hong Kong. It's the Hong Kong Cultural Festival. But I know you've also done work with, other cultures throughout China. So why Hong Kong? Do you feel it's too narrow? Do you think we should do more Chinese culture? What's your take on this?
I think Hong Kong's unique cultural DNA, and that's probably one of the reasons why people from all around the world love Hong Kong, is that Hong Kong is very Chinese, but at the same time it's very international. It doesn't matter where you come from, Europe, the States, Australia, or further afield. You come to Hong Kong, and particularly on Hong Kong Island, everyone speaks English, and it's very convenient. You see all sorts of signs and symbolisms within the city that would be familiar to you, no matter where you're from. And from a cultural perspective, I think Hong Kong also has its own unique cultural DNA that's different. When we talk about modernization of Chinese culture, be that martial arts, be that Cantonese opera, be that aim painting, be that Chinese music, and particularly development of Chinese music, Chinese cinema, where did it happen? Most of it actually happened in Hong Kong. And unfortunately, because Hong Kong is such a highly commercialized city, for the longest period of time, people have sort of neglected the artistic tradition that Hong Kong has inherited and continues to mold over the past 67 years. But the continued position of Hong Kong internationally as an incubator, as a hub for artistic creation, that has reverberations around the world beyond just our little city. So it's a great platform. And that sort of affects the work I do as well. So when I put on a Hong Kong Culture Festival, it's not just about Chinese art, it's not just about Hong Kong, but our unique DNA has always been reaching out and working with people around the world, be that in France, be that in Australia, Germany, because that's all part of Hong Kong history as well.
So that leads me to the other question. Do you have an ambition, a plan to have your festival rebrand Hong Kong in some way, or what's the objective?
Oh, absolutely. One of the objectives of Hong Kong Culture Festival is make people, starting Hong Kong, understand that we are sitting on incredibly valuable cultural assets, which are on the verge of extinction in many instances because lack of interest from the younger generation. And we want to show people that, look, people from France, they want to work with us. People from Germany, they think what we have here is valuable. And unfortunately, because of this psychological dilemma that Chinese people have inherited over the past 100 years, we need other people to reinforce the point that what we have is valuable, that Chinese culture somehow needs to be protected, and that is not out of date.
Great. So, Julien, are you rebranding Hong Kong? Are you rebranding France in Hong Kong? What's the sort of like cultural ambition of the French May?
I think Hing says it well. Hong Kong somehow is very international. So even having a French festival in Hong Kong is not that foreigner. It's really, first we have a lot of French people, as you said, and French restaurants, but really it's part of what is Hong Kong to have diversity of cultures and being a mix and match of everything. So it's not that bizarre to have a French cultural festival here. I think with Le French May, we do not try to rebrand Hong Kong. The idea is more to bring our own part to contribute actually to the building of Hong Kong with nourishing the local artists, nourishing the students, with bringing what we have. And we are very lucky that for years and centuries, French artists developed very interesting, contents. So the idea is to share that and see how it can, in a way, participate to what Hong Kong is becoming. Then when we talk about Lumières, the idea is not to rebrand Hong Kong, but to make people of Hong Kong rediscover what they have. And it's exactly what Hing said. I think there is a lot of potential in local culture as well. We are so much turned to the international somehow that we forget that locally there is a lot of things to see, to discover, to learn. And that's a bit what we're trying to do with the arts as, the medium to attract the attention somehow on that.
Great. So Rachel and I had some conversations before this, and she was telling me that she sees some of these festivals as almost a rebranding exercise for some of the younger cities and cultures in this region. So, Rachel, could you share a little bit on that topic?
I don't know if I'd use the word rebranding. I don't have that commercial mindset, but I think they're very important enterprises in sharing cultural knowledge and opportunities for artists to be seen outside of their home environments. It's very critical also for the artist's personal development to have these opportunities. And while I was singing the praises of Berlin and that anything is possible there are limitations. Things move much slower in Germany, in Europe generally, than here. The pace of creation is totally different, if not creativity. I'll give you an example. I was fortunate enough to be on the curatorial team of China's newest art festival, the first Daojiao New Art Festival, founded by Li Zhenhua, who some of you may know. He's in charge of the film program for Art Basel Hong Kong and many other initiatives. And I turned up at this festival, and they had a wonderful program, 4 venues across the city, one of which was a newly built Kunsthalle, a purpose-built gallery that they'd made in 2 months. 2 months. And it's beautiful. It wasn't shoddy construction. It was astounding to someone coming from Berlin, where they can't build an airport in years and years. So I think if that energy and that possibility is harnessed, really harnessed in a consolidated way with arts institutions communicating with each other, not competing with each other, anything is possible here.
Wonderful to hear that. I think we agree that there's increasing interest in the arts and culture in Hong Kong, and with the energy that we have and the speed with which we can do things in this city, I think there are still a lot of possibilities. So any closing comments from our speakers before we open the floor up to questions? Okay.
See more art, people.
Great. So if I may open up the floor. Shirley?
Fascinating talk. Thank you so much for being with us. This question is more for our locals, Julien-Loïc and Hing, about funding your festival. I think that's the biggest issue for all of us.
Do you have 2 hours?
Highlights and funding, government funding, and the challenges of getting government funding in Hong Kong versus corporates and private entities that support your operation. As a gallery association, we're a non-profit, and we're very keen to learn from your experience how we can work better to achieve further funding. So please, your inputs. Thank you.
I would say I have a 2-side answer somehow. Funding is tough, definitely, and getting more and more difficult because there is more and more programs in town as well. So the competition is getting stronger. But also, it's incredible to see how the market, somehow the companies can support arts initiative, particularly when it's related to educational outreach and we can see so many events that are privately funded because the government funding in Hong Kong, as you know, is quite divided and not very easy to get, I would say, particularly if you're not a very local arts performers group. So I believe there is, particularly with the growth of the art Basel Hong Kong and all the art interest and the rebranding, as we said, of Hong Kong as an art hub. Also now the corporate side is also looking at that as a marketing tool or a way to reach out the audience. So I believe there is more and more opportunities coming as well, that people realize that art and culture is not just wasting the money, but also somehow building the brand, building the audience, and doing more. So I believe there is, some potentials. But when we talk about government, then it's a bit different indeed.
I think from my perspective, funding or sponsorship is always a matter of give and take. Sponsors, donors less so, but sponsors give you money and in return they want brand exposure and they want something in return. So I'm sure as your ability to fundraise has already demonstrated that you get funding when you meet the funders' requirements and you satisfy their demand for brand exposure to generate additional values for them. From my perspective, as the organizer of Hong Kong Culture Festival, we are doing something that no one wants to do. We're promoting things like Cantonese opera, martial arts, aspects of things that for the longest time has been marginalized to the edge of society, has been neglected, forgotten by the arts and cultural communities in Hong Kong, something that's outside of mainstream, outdated, old-fashioned, things that people don't necessarily take an interest in. Thankfully, we have started Hong Kong Culture Festival at a time when I think mindset is beginning to change. After 1997 in particular, people are starting to see Hong Kong as having our own history, Hong Kong as having unique cultural treasures, which are perhaps watered down or somehow adulterated in its original context of practice in mainland China, whereas Hong Kong having had a very different history, different political experience from China. A lot of these assets are preserved better in Hong Kong. And just last year, the Hong Kong government, the Leisure and Cultural Services Department, started a new entity called Intangible Cultural Heritage Office with a relevant funding and development policy for so-called ICH. So I think the starting point for Hong Kong Culture Festival sort of matches up with the government expectation and general development of Hong Kong as a place of arts and culture. So we're, in a way, in the right place at the right time.
So, Hing, on that note, do you think we can say arts and culture in one breath, or is there still more funding or more quote-unquote respect for art as in the conventional forms of art versus culture, which is more, nebulous?
Well, I think all around the world, this realization that arts and culture belongs to everyone, it belongs to community, and does not belong to the cultural elite as such, does not just belong inside museums. Art can be street art. Performing arts can be people dancing in the street, hip-hop. It doesn't have to be within the theater. It doesn't have to be on stage. This realization is relatively recent. Around the world, speaking at UNESCO level, only in 2003, 2004 has there been articulated a consistent international policy for the safeguarding of so-called intangible cultural heritage. So I think the world is very, very slow in coming to realize that arts and culture belongs to a community. Now, in a conservative, essentially very conservative place like Hong Kong, there's still this massive divide where art is institutionalized. Art is within museums, galleries, and it's for lack of a better word, it's the products which are consumed by the cultural elite. And for the average person, if they're lucky, they go to the museum to take a look. But it's not something they have the ability to buy or participate in. And for a lot of people who are very important custodian stakeholders and lineage holders of local culture, they don't see themselves as being artists. They don't see themselves as being creators, which they are. So I think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to change this mindset, this massive divide between traditional culture in particular and arts.
Great. So on that note of, say, rediscovery, the new appreciation of what the city has to offer, our history, legacy, and all that, if I may ask my colleague in the audience, Angelica Lee, who is the head of the cultural arm of the Mill 6 Foundation. We're actually not opening until 2018, but we're doing a lot of pre-programming, and we've had the pleasure of working with the likes of David Elliott. So if if I may get some feedback from you on this subject.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think, I share a lot of values. I think what's the common values that we treasure, I think, especially from a Hong Kong perspective. So if I talk about, if you ask me about my view, I think, yes, there is an increasing number of people, especially philanthropists, yes, coming to do something, to contribute, to give back to the community. And I think one of the, I can talk about the Mill 6 Foundation, why it is, it was established last year. Heritage, I think it's something that we are constantly talking about these days, and the communities. How do we give back to the communities of Hong Kong through the projects that we do? I think it's really on the ground, co-learning. I think there's a lot of things that we need to do, and especially I agree so much that all the projects that we're running, actually we've done so much research at the back. It's not like you see an exhibition of one month, but actually it's like years of research and input from all the collaborators and people we work with. So it's, I think it's a collaboration, and what Rachel actually just mentioned. We like to collaborate and build bridges, and there are actually so many gaps we need to fill. So it's a lot of work we need to do, I think, in the coming years.
Thank you, Angelica. I think Mill 6 Foundation is particularly interesting to Hong Kong as a whole because we're part of the textile history of Hong Kong. And I think most of us in the audience might be too young to know, or it's not part of our active memory. The textile industry fed half the population in Hong Kong back in the 50s, 60s, and I think well into the 70s. So it actually, we don't see it. I mean, if we look at our clothes, we're not going to see a big in Hong Kong label. But back in those days, it actually was a big economic and therefore cultural driver of Hong Kong. So look forward to programming from Angelica and the team. So if we may open up the floor, for a final question.
So talking about the competition of programs and talking about what's marginalized, and so I'm very curious, why is it all always concentrated on a very specific part of Hong Kong Island? Hong Kong is diverse. Hong Kong has culture everywhere. It's a very interesting question. I live on one of the outlying islands. It's not Lama. So I'm just curious, why are all the outlying islands completely neglected in those cultural programming? I mean, you do have a few, very, very few musical programming. Some of them festival level, some of them just really completely local initiative. But why are we not bridging with the islands that are so close by any stretch of the imagination? That's my question.
There's a Chao has always had a local, very grassroots kind of festival going on with what do you call those, like those platforms that you carry around, and the bun festival, right, with people climbing up the bun tower.
Let me try to answer that. I agree with you that actually Hong Kong's history, if we look back beyond the past 150 years since the First Opium War, when Hong Kong Island was ceded to the British Empire. If we look beyond that, then for the longest part of Hong Kong history, actually, most of the culture, economic development, and population were actually concentrated in the new territories. Less so in terms of the outlying islands, but new territories certainly represent a very, very important part of Hong Kong history, and therefore, by definition, also Hong Kong heritage, both the built heritage as well as intangible cultural heritage. And I think out of the 10 intangible cultural heritage currently on the national list, 5 are from new territories, but I don't think this is a fair representation of the percentage of actual heritage in new territories, which should be much more significant. I think in the past, the Hong Kong government has approached conservation in a very itemized approach. So we have a lot of heritage sites which are open to the public, but there's not much going on dotted around new territories. Hopefully we're going to see more events being created in new territories. From my experience, this year at the Hong Kong Culture Festival, one of our core events, and actually the biggest scale in terms of public engagement event, was held at the Heritage Building in what used to be New Territories in Tsuen Wan, in Sam Tung Ok, which is one of the very, very rare gems of a ward community, basically a whole family living within a single site. And that has now become the site for the Intangible Cultural Heritage Office, and we had the ICH Mart over the whole weekend. So I think programming in New Territories to promote local arts and culture is certainly something we want to do more frequently in the future. As Cherry mentioned, some of the most signature festivals in Hong Kong are already in New Territories. For example, the Dragon Boat Racing in Tai O, such as the Chenbaoshan, the Taiping Qingjiu in Changzhou, etc. These are already signature events on Hong Kong's tourism and cultural calendar. Beyond that, as festival organizer, we would love to do more in New Territories and particularly on the islands, but we're always dealing with funding, dealing with logistics. And to do something in the island is just logistically that much more challenging and difficult. So when we're looking for a place to start, we want to do it close to city centre because that's how we get momentum for the festival. That's where we get funding. This is where we get the audience. So unfortunately, we have to balance reality with ideology, if you like, or the ideal.
Thank you, Hing. I think I owe you the final question.
I wanted to follow up on what you said about the textile industry and the fashion design industry. And over the last year, the Hawker Bazaar has been fighting to stay open. And last week, they went to LEDCO to plead their case. The place is a fire trap, but they have been supporting the fashion design industry. And most of the vendors in that place are not going to have a place for their livelihood. So when we talk about cultural heritage, social fabric is part of it, and livelihood is part of it too. And I'm just wondering, where's the connection between a place like Hawker Bazaar, where an 80-year-old vendor was in a fashion show, for instance, because there's such close connections between them.
I think it was held here at Asia Society, the Pangzai Fashion Show, yeah.
Yeah, and so now it's going to be closed, and I talked to one of the vendors who said that, yes, she is one of the few that's going to be placed somewhere else, but her rent's going to go up, and after 2 years, it's going to skyrocket. You know, so the textile industry, that's the heritage, and yet this place can't be supported.
Yes, I know the story of Pangzai and the conundrum that Pangzai is in because it is a fire trap. A lot of the sellers there are not properly licensed. I don't know if I have a ready answer for that because even if, theoretically, we're willing to move them into the mills per se, the location matters, right? That the fact that they are outdoors, that the fact they're in the middle of the community, that's where people are used to coming. And there's always an ecosystem, like any other industry, right? If you're in textile, you want the fabrics, but you also want the trims, and you also want the sewers nearby, and you probably want, graphics person nearby who's doing all your design, right? So sometimes just sort of decamping a certain older community for a certain industry into another area may or may not work. Most of the time, I would argue that it doesn't really work. So I'm afraid I don't have a ready answer to that. I don't know if there's anyone from the government here who would be able to tell us. I think this actually might take some kind of initiative. I'd like to see what everyone else has to say from the government, right? Because even if there is a private sponsor, it would be indoors. It would be in a small building. It would not be where it is now. So maybe Hing has something to say?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what you said. I think the key word you really mentioned is ecology. So, for example, we can create the most fantastic show being inspired by cultural heritage, but how does that actually benefit the community? It could be very inspiring for them to see it. It could be educational. They can learn about the history. But where does it go after the show closes? That goes back to the entire ecology of production and cultural production. So you need young people to create opportunities for young people to find jobs, but also for the older practitioners to find economic outlet for the labor. So without that ecology, we can't even start to talk about heritage in a living sense.
David?
Thank you. I'd just like to make a comment really following on from this. And I mean, I have spent quite a lot of time in Hong Kong and was working for 2 years on the Central Police Station project. And I make the comment from my experience there, but also observing things around me and also what you've been talking about. And one of the elephants in the room here is the stultifying effect of bureaucracy in Hong Kong. We're talking about things happening, you know, Kunsthalle being built in 2 months on the mainland. I mean, how long have they been talking about M+? I can remember since 1999 they were talking about it. Still, it's not up, and there's not a date. And there's something with the dead hand of government here. And it's not just government, it goes out to the other agencies that fund things. And it's very difficult if you're inside it to be critical of it because they give you money in the end. And you have to be nice to them because they give you money. A little bit like corporate sponsors. If you do things which corporate sponsors don't want, they won't support you. It's a problem. But it is really a very big problem when it relates to things like heritage. And heritage here is fetishized. I mean, police married quarters, built in the 50s, not a very remarkable building, is a great heritage project. And then craftspeople go in and they have to pay very high rents to get in there, and it's supposed to help craftspeople. It's all about money. It's not about heritage. And it sounds, this example you're talking about, in the end, it's about money too. And it's about bureaucracy, which claims to be for the people, but isn't. It's for its own self-serving ends, like in so many places, not just Hong Kong. Sorry, just a comment.
Thank you, David. On that note, I think we'll all have a lot of food for thought at lunch. So thank you all for coming to this part of the symposium. I'll hand the stage back to the organizers.